I got to kick this thing off. Can I kick it off? 1, 2, 3, 4. Ladies and gentlemen, listen.
Yo, what's good, everybody? You are now listening to another episode of the Man Listen Show. But before we get started, let's hear a few words from our sponsors.
Make sure you check out the new book, Mythbusters, Lessons from Active Black Fathers by Marvin Austin Banks Jr. Mythbusters, Lessons from Active Black Fathers, dispels the notion that black fathers are not involved in their children's lives. This book looks to inspire and motivate a new generation of fathers to own their roles as their children's first source of motivation and encouragement. So if you know a black dad or anybody who is a father figure to black children, make sure you buy them this book. You can purchase this wonderful book at www.activeblackdad.com.
DD's Daiquiris is your #1 supplier of premium daiquiri mixes. You will love the taste of our classic margarita and signature strawberry mixes. Follow us on Instagram and Facebook at DD's Daiquiris. DD is spelled DEEDEE. You can also find us at www.dd'sdaiquiris.com. DD's Daiquiris, giving good vibes to good people, one good drink at a time.
More Grace Counseling and Mediation Services offers individual and relationship counseling as well as mediation services to the community. At More Grace, healthy partnerships are valuable and beneficial. Please visit the website www.moregracecounseling.com for more information about our approach to counseling. More Grace Counseling and Mediation Services, where we offer more grace and more healing.
Please buy the new book by Arika Nicole Moore, Diabolical Tales of Woe. Diabolical Tales of Woe is a thrilling collection of short horror stories that leave you in an excited trepidation to see what will happen next. Prepare to face one horrific encounter after the next in this captivating novel. You can find this book on Amazon in the Kindle and paperback version. That is Diabolical Tales of Woe by Arika Nicole Moore. Conversate with Us Radio presents the Man Listen Show. We are the blackest radio show on the internet. We bring you our opinion on topics that affect the black community in an effort to enlighten, enrich, and empower every brother and sister that falls under the sound of our voice. We operate on the no hating frequency, so be prepared for us to keep it 100% real and 100% black all the time. Please follow the show on social media, on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter at Man Listen Show. You can also subscribe to the show on Spotify, iTunes, YouTube. Make sure you give us a thumbs up. Make sure you leave a comment. Make sure you tell everybody about the blackest radio show on the internet, the Man Listen Show. I'm your host, Mar B. So on today's show, we're going to talk about a crisis that is happening on our southern border involving black people. For those who don't know, there are thousands of Haitian immigrants who are trying to enter into the country. They're at the Del Rio border, the Del Rio River border. There's a bridge that crosses over to the U.S. from Mexico. And from last reports that I read, there's about 14,000 people living in inhumane conditions, and it is definitely a problem. When you look at some of the visuals that people have been showing about what's going on, it's stunning, and it's heart-wrenching just to see black people trying to cross over the border with agents, federal agents, border patrol on horses, using their reins as whips, and just basically intimidating these people, telling them to go back to Mexico, talking about how they do their women. This is reports that people were given from the translations that they were saying to the immigrants who were trying to come over to the country, and just the image of seeing white police officers, border patrol officers, harassing and handling black people in this way just broke the hearts of many people. It was terrible to see, and it just brought back so many thoughts and images of our dark past here in the United States. So, we definitely wanted to talk about this because, we often talk about Black people in the United States, American descendants of slaves. But, this is something that we can't ignore. And to talk about it intelligently, I wanted to bring in somebody who is not only from Haiti, but a good friend of mine, good friend of the show, Dr. Mario P. Charles. Mario, what's up with you, man?
Hey, Marv, how you doing, man? It's always a pleasure to see you, man.
I'm good, my
Been a
brother.
long
I'm
time.
good. So, Mario goes back, another Mizzou connection. Mario and I came into Mizzou together as freshmen, known each other for years. This is an amazing brother, an amazing Black father, an artist, a musician. He is a PhD, a doctor at a university. What are you teaching now, Mario?
I'm actually teaching social studies methods for pre-service teachers.
Okay. So, and you come from Haitian parents. Tell your story. Tell about where you were born, about your parents, how you came to the U.S. so people have some background on you.
Surely, yeah. So basically, I'm the child of Haitian immigrants. My parents actually came here in the 70s, but basically they were the first of basically a long wave of Haitians that came to the United States, first in New York. But then definitely in the 90s, a huge influx of Haitians in Miami. But somehow my parents landed in St. Louis, Missouri, of all places. That's why to this day, every Haitian I meet, I was like, so where you live? I was like, St. Louis. I said, St. Louis? They have Haitians in St. Louis? Because no Haitian has ever heard of St. Louis, let alone know that we're from there. So it's always a funny story. But yeah, it's been just an interesting experience growing up in the United States as a child of immigrants, having kind of a different experience and a different take on the events that we see happening in our country. Really what we are seeing here today is really something that's, as I'm sure we've all experienced, is something in the long line of what we've experienced in terms of what we're exposed to, of what Haiti is, and also what we don't see, a lot of what we don't see about Haiti. Because, to really discuss this issue is to discuss a very complex relationship between Haiti and the United States, issues of race, as Mark brought up, in terms of just the imagery of basically, modern day slave catchers, rounding up, more captives, so very much in that way, that's been my experience. That's what I was taught, was to love our country, love where we come from, because our forefathers, so just like kids in elementary school and forefathers of George Washington and Abraham Lincoln. Well, at home we were taught Toussaint Louverture, Jean-Jacques Dessalines, Alexandre Pétion, Christophe, amongst many, as far as fighting for our liberation, to be the first Black republic in the Western Hemisphere. So that's a sense of pride, that's a sense of identity that all Haitians cling to. But it's also there's also a lot of tribulation that comes along with that, because to be the first country to endeavor to free the shackles of slavery on your own, you're going to pay the price. And the United States has basically been the harbinger and the giver and the keeper of that punishment ever since Haiti was a country all the way up until now.
So we could do probably a 2-hour show on the importance of Haiti. When you talk about Toussaint Louverture, Dessalines, and the Haitian Revolution that took place, and how that affected us, our ancestors. When you look at the Louisiana Purchase and you look at how slavery was impacted and how it changed because of what happened in Haiti, and how white supremacy began to change how they treated us in the United States based off what happened in Haiti. So we are interconnected in that way. So there's a lot that we could talk about on this show, but I want to just go back, just bring it to the current times and what's going on right now. Of course, we know back in 2010, there was a devastating earthquake that affected the country. But most recently, there was another earthquake. But before that, there was an assassination of your president. And I want to give people the background of what's going on and why people are fleeing Haiti so that they understand why we're in the situation that we're in. So if you could talk about the presidential assassination and the effects of the earthquake, so we can kind of set the tone for everybody so they understand what's going on.
Surely. So again, this is my point of view. And you talk to many Haitians, many experts, you're going to run into many different opinions. So but from my point of view, again, analyzing a very complex situation, I would say that the assassination of Jovenel Moïse is really more of a symptom of a much greater problem that's basically taking place in Haiti. From my perspective, Haiti, much like other Caribbean nations, was basically a burgeoning agricultural economy until it was invaded by the United States in 1915. Okay, and so basically from 1915 to about 1935, it was occupied by the United States. At which time the United States, in its in imperialistic industrial power, tried to shift Haiti from an agricultural economy to an industrial, and in doing so, it actually shut down several economies that were actually functioning in Haiti, like livestock, the Creole pig, from the manufacturing of rice, coffee, other fruits, right? And so as the United States was shutting that down, it was also basically breaking down the economy, which allowed for a lot of Haitians that lived in the countryside to live, okay? And so once the United States removed itself, it also removed Haiti's gold reserve, right? So the United States is actually in possession of the gold reserve that was also backing Haiti's economy, okay? And so as a result, so it's actually in the backdrop, Haiti is also paying back a debt to France for basically freeing themselves, okay? To the tune of, the amount was $240 million, but that was in the late 1800s, right? So the sum of what that is today is outrageous. So Haiti actually ended up paying that by 1947. So when you think about all these different events that basically are crippling or stopping a nation from growing, right? So like, say you're trying to start a business, but you can't start a business because everybody's saying, hey, you owe me, and you can't move until you pay me this, and we won't even recognize, you can't even have any customers until you're basically sitting right here doing what we want you to do. You're constantly fighting against the wall, right? So right after 1947, that's paid, and basically the last, I guess you would consider the last freely elected president, Magloire, was president of Haiti in like the 1950s. Basically after which the CIA, in my opinion, the CIA helped to contribute to basically remove him from office and basically implanted Jean-Claude Duvalier, who otherwise known as Papa Doc, who was basically a tyrant who ruled Haiti for 30 years and robbed it of its riches, and also created a culture of fear. And that same culture of fear is where my parents came from in terms of escaping Haiti, because again, that was a situation to where, like, I'll give you an example. My oldest uncle was actually a sergeant in the Haitian army, but because he was seen as part of the political opposition, his name was put on an assassination list. So he had to hide, he had to leave, and ended up having to seek exilation here in the United States in order to escape being executed. So it was these type of political situations that really just created a very oppressive situation in Haiti. So now you can imagine a dictator, basically, so like I said, what we find often dictators do is that they benefit themselves and their neighbors, and at the expense of the populace. So all this time, even still, education is not a public right, healthcare is not a public right. These are all things that Haiti could have had if it actually had an opportunity to build itself. So time after time, especially under a dictator like Papa Doc, it creates a situation to where people are living in fear, living in intimidation. So just to fast forward it a little bit here. So just to bring it to, let's say 2010, right? 6 years previous, Haiti's celebrated its 2004, this Bicentennial, basically it's 200 anniversary of independence, right? So it's supposed to be a time of reflection for all Haitians, like how do we turn our situation around? And again, several years afterward, Haiti has one of the most challenging earthquakes that it's had in 100 years. And it really, what it does is it really exposes a lot of the weaknesses that the country has had. And so what we're seeing as far as the need for Haitians to migrate is because bottom line, there's not enough economy for people to survive in Haiti, a country of 11 million people, right? And so everyone is trying to live, and it's extremely hard to live when there's not enough money to go around, not enough resources to go around. Even if you do have education, even if you do have certificates, there's not enough jobs to actually get it. So you're looking for different means to survive. And a lot of people do, but there's just not enough to go around. So what ended up happening is like situations in like Chile or Brazil, where they needed cheap labor, especially like Brazil needed cheap labor to build its Olympic stadiums and other things for 2014 Olympics, things of that nature. So they would invite cheap labor like Haitians to come down and do the work. Same thing in Chile, same thing in Venezuela, same thing in Ecuador. And so unfortunately, once those industries dried up, so did the need for that cheap labor. And because all the time they've been in those countries, those countries have different ways of applying for visas, applying for work permits, things of that nature. And so if you have a cheap labor working class, it's not doing that. Once they're not useful, the countries are basically, hey, get them out. So that's where this mass of specifically Haitians are coming from, right? When they talk about them walking through Central America. We actually, if you guys remember, there was a crowd of basically people from Honduras, Guatemala, and Ecuador that were basically walking up to the border several years ago. So this is basically another wave. What we're seeing here is that, unfortunately, the policies of globalizing economies for the sake of short-term interests are not sustaining people. And because Haiti is in a specific situation to where it's in a crippled economy, right? Mired by debt, mired by corruption, right? These things is constantly making it hard to start and stop. But as a result, people still have to survive. And so what Haitians do is literally anything they can do to survive. And that's what we're seeing here. We're seeing the clash of Haitians' need to survive versus United States foreign policy in terms of immigration.
So I'm gonna bring the crew in so they can get their thoughts on the images that we saw. But I'll be 100% candid with you. On this show, we often talk about Black Americans. And when we talk about Black Americans, we talk about what we call American descendants of slaves. People who were brought over to through the translated slave trade and whose ancestors were rooted in this country, and how we are going to progress and get our reparations for what was done to us. And oftentimes when we talk about that, we talk about, the lack of wealth that the Black community has and some of the impediments to that. And immigration is one of those things that comes up, right? Because we say, often, I'll speak for myself, the crew can speak for themselves. I say, okay, well, how can you fix another country when you have the citizens who built this country who need that help, who need that restorative justice? So just to put that out there, I don't want people who follow the show to say, okay, well, now y'all being hypocritical. But no, here's the reason why I wanted to talk about this, because we saw how the current administration pulled out of Afghanistan and how that was blundered. And I don't think there was an easy way to get out of that mess. And I don't think it was the fault of, the Biden administration, but it was a blunder and it was a mess how they got up out of it.
Yeah.
But you fly, I think to date, like 50,000 Afghanistans over into this country, and I think more are coming. And you got cities who are saying, we want them to come, we want to work with them, we want them here. And we look at history and we look how people who aren't of African descent are brought into this country and how they are propped up as somewhat of a buffer class to keep us as Black Americans down. So my thing is, if you're going to be so welcoming to people who are going to, as we know, by looking through history, maybe not be the most kind to Black Americans, how could you bring yourself to mistreat these people who are trying to come in from a situation that you created? You destabilized their country. You robbed them of their resources. And now that they hear that they need help, now you want to turn your back on them. And those images that we saw were appalling. It just made me turn my stomach. And what you talked about, looking like modern day slave catchers, that's exactly what I thought of when I saw it. But I want to ask, before I let you respond to that, I want the crew to talk about what they felt when they saw those images.
I mean, I agree. When I first saw it, I definitely didn't think it was from modern times. I thought it was from the past. And when I realized that was the Border Patrol, like hunting down Haitian immigrants, I was like, I had the same exact thought, mostly because I have a friend who's from Yemen, and she was just talking about how amazing it is that people are coming over from Afghanistan. And I'm like, well, we got people here that need help. And I get that y'all need help. I get that America did, a lot of things over there to disrupt, you guys' political system, and it's not safe and everything, but same deal over here for the rest of us. And so when you see them treating Haitians this way, it reminds me of how, unfortunately, how short-lived some of our boycotts and stuff are. I remember when the Dominican Republic was first kicking out the Haitians, and we were like, oh, we're boycotting the DR, nobody's going there. And it's almost like people forgot about that, like, I don't know, a couple months later. And I see people in the DR and I'm like, wait, I thought we wasn't going to the DR. But it's just heartbreaking to see that pretty much nothing has changed in America. At the end of the day, the Black man and the Black body will always be open to victimization by the government. And unfortunately, I don't see that changing anytime soon.
Yeah, I mean, for those who don't know, I have a degree in Spanish from the University of Missouri. And obtaining that degree isn't just learning to speak the language, it's learning about the culture of Latin America, of Spain, and what goes on in those countries. And I was fortunate to have Black professors who taught me at the University of Missouri, who taught me about Spanish culture. They taught about what was really happening and how those of African descent were always put on the bottom. And how, when you looked at the Dominican Republic, how you saw many of those who looked just like us on this show. If me, C, or Rika, we went over to the Dominican Republic, they even started speaking Spanish to us, they think we were Dominican, but the disdain and hate that they had for the other occupants of the island of Hispaniola, the Haitians, that was terrible. So I knew way back then that I was never going to mess with the Dominican Republic. And I think people kind of became hip to that, but because it's such a cheap trip and it's an island, destination, folks, put the dollar ahead of their morality, and they still go to this place. And what's funny about it, every person I know who travels to the Dominican Republic, Black, they talk about how much they hated there. They talked about how much they were mistreated while they were there, and how, their money was good, but they were treated like they were Black because they are Black, even though those folks look just like them. But Lab C, what did you think when you saw these images?
I was right there with Erika and you and Mario, man. I was like, man, this is modern day slave catchers, and it just brings up the history on the United States soil about slave patrol and how that really is the root of our modern day police system. And so it's just a new day, a new name for a centuries old problem here in the US. And at first, honestly, I'm glad Mario cleared that up. I wasn't sure how the Haitians, why they were at the southern border. And I was like, how did they get to Mexico? But that was a good backstory. Like I had no idea about the, migration from South America through Central America and everything like that. I just knew that some Cuban baseball players, when they defect to the US, they come in through Mexico sometime because it's not too far from the western edge the eastern edge of Mexico. And so they go there first. And then, so I was thinking it was something similar, but that was a good backstory, a good history lesson for us all. But
you actually, I'm sorry to cut you off. You actually have Haitian enclaves, if I'm not wrong, Mario, in Mexico. When I was doing some research for the show, I mean, if you go like to Tijuana, you'll see like Mexican restaurants and enclaves where they have set up to help people who are, migrating from Chile up through South America, up to Mexico, to get them, resources that they need in Mexico to try to say, okay, you can stay here or you can go to the US. And we all know what life is like in the United States versus Mexico. So,
and to also address the immigration issue, as far as the deportation of the Haitians, like that's been going on really since Obama, like close to the end of Obama's administration, all throughout Trump. Because again, when we look at the face of media, right, in terms of how they paint the picture of immigration, normally it's Mexicans or Mexican immigrants that are the trope. But again, when we consider immigrants as a whole, the main people that are deported are Haitians or people of African descent. All right. So again, these particular images, much like we see with anyone being brutalized by police, George Floyd amongst many others, it's stirring because we're seeing it. But this has gone on, right? People have lost their lives, many a time along the same border. And again, when you have this mass of people because of basically clerical errors between countries. All right, it's because essentially the United States is taking the position that Haitians cannot find refuge on the soil because they're not fleeing political persecution, right? And unfortunately, like we're saying, because these particular people are coming as cheap labor source from Central America, from Latin America, they don't have any paperwork from citizenship from wherever they came from, let alone from where they left Haiti. So basically, they're people with no paperwork, so they can't even prove, aside from their story, right, that they're seeking asylum. But when you actually look at the history of Haiti, again, it's hard to separate the political from the economic, right? Well, Haiti is existing under economically oppressive conditions that are basically nurtured by a defunct political situation, or more probably a corrupt political situation. So, it is understood. The United States understands why Haitians are doing this. But what I think the difference between Afghan and Haitians is that, much like Marv was saying, the United States is trying to clean up a 20-year mess, that they invested trillions of dollars in, right? The United States is not that invested in trying to fix this up, because this was more of a back-end deal where they were just, especially through the Clinton Foundation, getting something on the side. This is not something but this is a problem that's now creeping up on their back door, right? And so, this is what we're seeing in general now in this country, is that America, much like Malcolm said, man, chickens are coming home to roost in so many different ways, right? And Marv, the one thing that you mentioned about focusing on Black Americans, what I want you to know too, is that in the Haitian community, our perspective always tends to be, especially now, how can we fix our own problem, right? Haitians are not always out to be like, oh, help us, right? Help us in the situation. That's definitely a trope that is conveyed. But if you talk to the enclaves, you were saying what we call the diaspora, if you talk to the diaspora in the United States and Canada and France and Africa and anywhere else, right? There's generations of people that are talking about how can we fix our own problem, because for the same reason that we actually alleviated ourselves from slavery, we should be able to alleviate ourselves from the same situation. But it's complex. There are a lot of players in the game, just in this one, let alone in the context of the United States. You know?
There is. And then, before I bring C in, I think the main thing, first of all, this is like the definition of throwing a rock and hiding your hands, what the United States is doing. And to your point about Haitian Americans, Haitian Canadians who are trying to fix their own situation, the reason why I have you on this show is because you've always been down for the struggle. What we've always talked about are those who come in and undermine our struggle as American descendant of slaves. Those who come in from the diaspora, you name it, from, whether it be from Africa, where in any part of the Caribbean, and take resources that were intended for American descendant of slaves and then try to side with the dominant society against us. So we recognize that it's only a select few who act like this, but folks like yourself, folks like others who are down for the struggle to realize white supremacy is a global system that is affecting us all. And if we fix the situation that's in Haiti, we fix the situation that's in Africa, we fix the situation here, we'll all be better off. But we all have our individual fights that we need to respect and we need to continue to overcome. But see, what did you think when you saw these images?
When I saw the pictures and the photos and the article and the video, I mean, it was horrific. Like, I couldn't believe that anybody in today's age would think that was okay to ride around on horses with whips and chains. And then, like you guys mentioned before, it automatically put you in the mindset of slavery. And, a lot of people were saying, it looks like a picture from long ago. Like, I don't think much has changed. I just think there's not a whole lot that we're being shown. Like, I'd be willing to bet, I don't, personally know any, Haitian immigrants who have came over recently, but I'd be willing to bet that that wasn't the first time, or even any Mexican immigrants that could say anything. I bet that's not the first time they've rode around on horses with chains and whipping people. I think this is maybe one of the few times we've had so many people with so many cameras and pictures and able to send pictures to get out there. So it was horrifying seeing that. I mean, it's just like the audacity to feel like they thought that was okay. And like, they're okay with it. Like, I suppose nobody's going to get punished. No one's going to get suspended for their job. Like, where did you even purchase whips at to get people in line? Like, why? I don't even know who thought that was okay.
Let's be clear, though, they weren't whips. Those were actually the reins from the horses, but they were extra long, and they were.
I was gonna say, but aren't those shorter though? Because why would you need something that long if the horse you're riding on it right in front of you?
And they were using them in that way. And Al Jazeera, I believe Al Jazeera was the people who were recording this taking place, and it's just like police brutality in the U.S. We've been knowing this been happening for years. To your point, C, but now people have camera phones and they're able to record it. And you're able to, witness the atrocities that are going on.
Right.
Here's the other piece that I want to bring up. And Rio, we give our sister C a lot of flack because she's the only Republican on the show, right? And I bring that up not to give her a hard time, but to make this point. Had this happened while Trump was still in office, the outrage would know no bounds. But I don't think we're seeing the same outrage for this situation under Biden as we would had it happened under Trump. And it is just as inhumane, it is just as horrific, it is just as unacceptable. What do y'all think about that?
So I agree with you, even though you threw the part about me being a Republican there had absolutely nothing to do with your point.
That was a segue. That was what you call a segue, sis.
But you're absolutely right though. Think about how the Democrats acted when Trump said he was going to build a wall. Like, that was the most racist thing ever. They couldn't believe it. It was a waste of time, money, resources. You can't treat people like that. And then they talk about who was in the country first and all this other stuff. Where is the Democrat outrage right now while these people are being hit with, like what you said, would you say they were? Something that you're supposed to discipline horses and cows with. You know, where's that same outrage? So I agree. Had this happened during the Trump administration, I think people would definitely be handling and talking about it a lot differently.
And I know I talk about, I live in Texas, and this happened at the Texas border. So our governor, Governor Rollaway, y'all can look up why I call him that. They currently have what they're calling a steel wall, where they have actually hundreds of DPS and Border Patrol vehicles parked along the border to try to keep people out. That's the situation that we are in, and that's the type of crisis that we're in this current situation. And it's just hard to see Black, normally my whole take on this, when they talk about immigration, and I when people call me out, call me a hypocrite. What we say, see, HYON, hold your own nuts, because we got to worry about us as Black Americans. But just to see these Black faces being treated like this by white border patrolmen who look like modern day slave catchers, that we can't let that stand. We can't let that ride. But what do you think, man? What do y'all think about this? Would it be would it be more outraged if this happened under Trump?
I think it would be. I mean, definitely, and that's part of, something that C always says is, the Democrats and the whole Democratic Party, they take your votes for granted, right? So they say, once we get the vote, we can still carry on the exact same policies that the Republicans have been carrying on, be just as terrible to you. But guess what? You voted for us. So something like this is where, you can say you got us on one time. Say you got us one time.
Well, and to your point, the policies that Biden is using to expedite deporting, that's how you say it, the deportation of Americans, it's a Trump policy.
Right.
It's a Trump policy that he's using to do this to these people who are fleeing this terrible situation.
But I did want to say this though too. It can't be coincidence that the first time I've ever seen the images of them at the border on the horse, on the patrol, is with Black people. As many years as they've had this crisis at the border, I've never seen mounted policemen or border patrol on horses, slinging whips around. I've never seen that for anybody. And then when it's Black people, then all of a sudden it happens. That's not coincidence.
It's other people are less threatening in their eyes. That's the way they see it.
I was about to say allegedly, but this isn't the first time that the Democrats have gotten exposed as the hypocrites that they are. The two-party system that we have, which is supposed to be 4 parties, is really such a sham. It's just 2 heads of the same animal. They're doing the same thing. They're just out there getting rich. All of them are millionaires. The rest of the world is starving and struggling, and all they're doing is protecting their own interests. And that's what they're going to continue to do. Biden hasn't done anything impressive, and neither has Harris. I haven't even really heard, what is she doing?
Man, I don't know either.
I'm playing. She was supposed to be, they brought her back up off of that. She was supposed to be kind of addressing the immigration issue.
Yeah.
She was supposed to be addressing the immigration issue. And they're going to have a tough time. They're going to have a tough time when you got the immigration problem, the crisis at the border. You got most people beforehand, most Black people were just like, man, whatever, we don't care about them. That's bad. You got kids separated from their parents, but what about us here in the US? But now you see Black faces. Problem. You haven't passed the George Floyd bill. You haven't seen any movement on that. You didn't cancel them student loans like you said you was going to do.
Definitely did that.
You didn't cancel them student loans like you said you was going to do. And we ain't talking about the little Romeo school. We're talking about for all of us, Joe.
Right.
So
day one.
Yeah, day one. Midterms is coming up, and it's going to be a problem. It's going to be a problem. Not that I think that Black people are going to vote for any Republican, but what Black people will do is they say it don't make a difference. I'm staying home. So,
which I don't agree with. Much the same as electing a Republican.
Which is the same. Yeah,
I
which
mean,
I don't agree with and I
Republican,
don't endorse.
Democrats, they all the same.
Yeah, I
Yeah,
don't
I'm
agree
with
with
Rika.
that.
They
Man.
argue with each other and act like they don't like each other, and they all go to lunch, they all go to dinner, they invite each other for Christmas parties. I mean, the same
Right.
time they were arguing over who should get a stimulus check and who shouldn't, and how the country could afford it, and how we got to raise its ceiling debt and all that. They were giving each other raises, like they're voting
Yeah.
that they got more money and had to work less days a year. The whole time there's people protesting and arguing with each other over peanuts.
That's
Like,
just like me in court. Me sitting there arguing with prosecutors and arguing before the judge and all that. And then soon as court broke for lunch, I went to lunch with the prosecutor and the bailiff and bumped into the judge down the hall having lunch with all these other people. And they got a section in the back where they expect everybody from the court to come back and chill and eat. I was like, oh, look, I done made it. I got invited. But either way, everybody is friends because at the end of the day, everybody's eating.
They all eating it.
Until they stop
Yeah.
eating, they gonna stay friends.
And I'm gonna bring Mario back in. But y'all do know Biden gave the eulogy for Strom Thurmond. And Strom Thurmond was one of the most notorious racists
Yeah.
in American history.
Yeah, you know,
Biden
so
gave the eulogy for that.
so listening to you guys speak, it really brings to the notion is how do we break our own personal notions of aligning ourselves with one colonial master or another, right? And so basically to center ourselves, so that's what I was saying before. It's like conversations you have amongst different Haitians will either be, Haiti is, it's gone, it's far gone conclusion. You have other Haitians that are like, hey, look, this is our time to help build. So it just depends on who you're asking, right? And so much in the same way, when we look at this, when we look at our overall situation, is that politicians are preserving their power, regardless of whatever team they're on, red or blue. So how do we represent, the RBG colors as far as political stance, right? From not only from a U.S. perspective, but from a global one, right? Because in my opinion, every part of the diaspora plays a critical role, right? Because Haiti serves a role as a figure of what can be done in terms of breaking the chains, just as much as we can look towards our African brothers and sisters as far as having access to natural resources necessary to liberate yourself. Because when you talk about reparations, you talk about empowering a nation, right? You got to have the basics of an economy. And that goes even beyond manufacturing. You have to take it a step further. What access of natural resources do we have? And that's why China, Europe, and everyone else has their claws on Africa, because they don't care about the people, but it's the richness of the land. And so the one thing that I found the last time I was in Nigeria is that Black Americans or Americans from the diaspora get so much love because of what they're exposed to via music and entertainment, right? My nigga, right? You get that all the time, right? And so what we can find is that,
hey, we forgot to tell Dr. Charles we don't use the N-word on the
oh
show.
well,
We'll give you a pass. We'll go ahead.
And he said it with an accent, so they probably didn't catch it. He said
Yeah, exactly. It's not the same. Yeah.
Right.
Let that slide.
G-A.
Yeah, but we have to consider what it means to be a black person or a person of African descent as a global citizen, right? Because again, my personal opinion, this country definitely owes people of African descent, people who were enslaved here. This country owes the indigenous people who they basically wiped down and murdered and slapped in the reservations. This country owes, a lot of different people, but it's not going to go out without a fight. That's why, I'm in Florida now. That's why you see these guys with their flags waving from Proud Boys to Thin Blue Line and all this, because they feel like they're losing control. They feel like they're losing their power, and they are, right? And so what I just want to stir up everyone is that when we see signs that are disruptors, that trigger us, as much as we come from a space of morality and compassion, as we should, in terms of our locus of control, The only thing we can control is us. So the more that we empower ourselves towards being independent individually, that will change. The more we align ourselves with different missions, all of us understanding that white supremacy is our main enemy.
So before we wrap up the show, we talked about the destabilization of Haiti and how the most recent president was assassinated right before this most recent earthquake. What's the story behind that? And when you have something happening to a country with such a history fraught with, having, imperialist countries meddling and mixing in and sabotaging its development, what's going on now with Haiti? And do you see Haiti bouncing back to where it's a place where its citizens can stay and be safe and secure and can help rebuild that country?
So as far as the assassination of the president, much like I said, it's a symptom of a much larger problem going on in Haiti as far as political corruption, economic stability, and basically a favor system. So Jovenel Moïse, as a president, for all essential purposes, was, a friend to the United States because he upheld policies that supported the United States, oftentimes, unfortunately, to the detriment of Haiti. The last time I was in Haiti in 2018, there were a lot of protests, basically centered around the idea of Côté Côte or Pétrole Caribe, because Haiti basically set up an agreement with Venezuela to basically get oil on a discount, right? Basically because Venezuela at the time had a surplus. But because Venezuela lost that surplus, basically through changing the regime, Haiti was basically left out in the cold. But in terms of that exchange, Haiti had access to over almost like at least close to $1 billion in terms of access to develop infrastructure. But where did that money go? So what you're dealing with is corruption from high levels, and basically it shows up much like other Caribbean and other nations where basically you have a 1% class that basically helps to contribute to maintain a very strong separation of basically rich and poor, so that the country doesn't evolve, and those basically small interests continue to gain the capital, whether it's natural resource, whether it's money, whether it's human resource, black market resource. All those things are basically, all that money is collected by very few hands. And so when going back to the assassination, Moïse started actually speaking out against these factions that were contributing to the corruption, right? Because these factions manifest in the form of Haitian gangs that at one time were street gangs, but are now basically coalesced and led by at least one person named Barbecue, right? So the government in Haiti is basically so disenfranchised that it actually rivals gangs as far as control of the populace. Okay, so when whoever organized the assassination of Jovenel Moïse had more influence in Haiti than the president himself.
So honestly, it just seems as if it's a mess that there is no easy answer to. And I hope that the brothers and sisters in Haiti can try to find some semblance of order and to recover from the meddling and the sabotage of the growth of their country. Mainly because you can't have people fleeing their country trying to get into, wherever they're trying to get into, whether it's Chile, whether it's Mexico, or now trying to get into the US. And if you look at the video of the people who are basically living under this bridge, 14,000 people in atrocious, inhumane conditions, you can't have that. And it's my hope that the people of Haiti can, help fix their own situation, so that people can come home and that they can have some security. I remember when the 2010 earthquake happened, and people were so concerned about, okay, how do we donate to Haiti? Because
you know, we talk about Africa, and you know, we often talk about on the show how, you know, at least us, not well, I won't speak for everybody, but I'm pretty sure I speak for everybody. I give a side eye to Africa because I, you know, I'm like, I don't know if one of y'all sold us over here. So, you know, y'all, I kind of look at y'all crazy. But I have an affinity for the Haitians because of the Haitian Revolution, because of Toussaint Louverture, because of Dessalines, and that spirit that they had to overcome white supremacy, right? But we also knew because of the Clinton Foundation and the shenanigans that happened with that, and the Red Cross and the shenanigans that happened with the Red Cross, many of us were like, how do I donate money to Haiti and make sure it gets to Haitians? So I found myself talking to people I knew who were from Haiti, who I thought might, you know, be in the struggle, and like, hey, you got family there? You know what I'm saying? Let me break you off some bread. I had a brother who was selling coffee. He was selling Haitian coffee. Apparently, I'm not a coffee drinker, but apparently this coffee like is like super duper strong. And he was selling coffee so they could create like a water system for this village in the countryside in Haiti. So that's how I donated to try to help them, you know, try to bring things back. So, I mean, I wanted you on the show, man, because we needed somebody who could talk about it intelligently. We needed somebody who was real, who was genuine. And I think you accomplished all that, my brother. So thank you. And I pray for your people. You know, hopefully you don't have any family that's over there struggling or who are, you know,
families down there struggling. But again, like they're helping people rebuild Okai. They're, you know, they're basically there pulling people out of the rubble. But again, you know, when you talk about major arteries that can deliver supplies, that's taken a long time for, you know, for things to happen. But again, man, if I could tell you the video again that family members and other Haitians sent to each other via WhatsApp, you see people helping each other. So again, you'll see harrowing, you know, videos of people stealing and stuff like that. But you also see people who come from the countryside with bana and manyak and zabuka and mongo and all things to feed the people who are working to rebuild, right? They don't ever show you that. So as much as depressing and challenging these images may be, there's always hope on the other side, and people are always working together in Haiti and everywhere else.
Well, again, man, I mean, I know we could talk about this for about 2 hours, but we don't have that much time. Thank you again, bro, for coming on the show. Mario P. Charles, you did a wonderful job. Folks, make sure you follow us on social media, on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter at manlistenshow. Make sure you subscribe to the show on iTunes, Spotify, and YouTube. Leave a comment. Y'all need to share this show because there was some deep knowledge shared about Haiti and how it affects us in the United States. And more people need to know about this knowledge and be aware of the situation that's going on. So make sure you share this with your people, share this with your friends, and let them know about the blackest radio show on the internet, the Man Listen Show. We'll holler at you next time. Peace.
Peace.
Ça passe.
Aboulé.